What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through some of the best differentials in the current FPL game. What we're going to be doing in this video is I want to be creating a draft that you guys can actually make, can afford, but you might not be able to go with in your own team because of one or two constraints. But don't worry, you guys will understand what I'm talking about when we actually look at the draft. But in this video, I want to give you guys the definition if you guys should be going for too many of these, and finally the draft to end it off. Now what I want you guys to do before you watch the video is comment down below what your best differential is, or who your best differential is currently in your FPL team. Now I know that there might be people that see this and that ownership might increase if it's a really good option, but at least you might get some likes in the comments down below. What I want you to put in the comments down below before you actually see the video is I want you guys to see if I've selected them when we do talk about the draft team. But with that being said, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. This video has been sponsored by FantasyFootballFix.com, introducing the Elite XI Team Reveal, the most advanced team reveal to date, with push notifications allowing you to track every move these managers make throughout the season. With a combined 77 top 10k finishes, you don't want to miss out on this one. Compare your team to these elite managers. Unlock stats and data to see how these managers maintain their teams. Find out more about the Elite XI Team Reveal over at FantasyFootballFix.com. Now before we get into the actual draft and the options or differential options, I want to give you guys the definition of a differential because it can change from person to person and really the goalposts kind of move as the season goes on. Now what makes an FPL asset a differential is basically dependent on their ownership. Now that ownership percentage can vary, you guys can go for 10%, 20%, but if you guys know how the season's currently going with a massive template, you can even take that number up to about 20%. So in this video, I'm going to use 20% as my kind of metric. Most of these options are actually lower owned than that, but I think 20% in a template season is perfectly fine, especially in game week 1. So that's what I'm basically talking about with the goalposts kind of shifting for differential throughout this season, because a player could actually be highly owned, maybe 50% ownership. But if you guys do kind of cut the ranks down, such as top 10k, top 100k, they might be lowly owned within those ranked divisions. But it's game week 1, all of us are currently number 1 in the world, to celebrate that while you guys can. But you guys know me, throughout this season, I usually use the top 10k metric just to check my ownership stats. But in terms of the differential, you guys can have your own opinion, but as I said in this video, I'm going to be using 20% because for game week 1, especially with how template the drafts are currently looking, that's good enough for me. Now the big question is, should you guys actually go for differentials or not at the start of this season? I've always said this throughout the preseason that I don't mind if you guys do go template, because the template this year is pretty strong in my opinion because of the price points that FPL seem to underprice a lot of the defenders. So I always say don't go differential for the sake of being differential. If it's a good template option that you think will get points, then go for them. But if there is one or two differentials that you guys see that can vary your team from the template, I would go with those as long as you're confident of them getting you FPL points. But that's why I kind of said at the start of this video to comment your differential down below, because then I will advise you if it's a good option or not a good option depending on your current team. Now the reason I actually wanted to get this draft out a week before the deadline is that I think next week, with all the new teams and new managers kind of registering for FPL and signing up, I think the differential team might be slightly worse than it currently is, as those casual managers might auto-select and just pick random options. So yes, I'm kind of calling you guys an FPL expert if you have registered a team already, but if you have not, no worries about that. Simply watch this video and watch my other videos to get ahead of the curve. But now let's get on to the actual draft, and that's probably what you guys have been waiting for. So I'm going to be giving you guys a full starting 11 and actually a full bench to talk about in terms of these ownership and differentials. Now the first thing that you guys can see on the bottom right hand side, yes, we actually do have 2.5 million in the bank, so you guys have some money to play with here. So you could actually upgrade one of these two assets to a more template option. But starting off with the bench as we usually do, but this is going to be slightly more interesting than usual because these bench options are super lowly owned, but they might get you some points or they might not. First of all, Guaita, we've actually snuck a 4.5 goalkeeper on our bench. I just thought Guaita at 1.8% ownership was simply outstanding, but this obviously is only going to be taken into account if he actually starts for Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace just signed Johnston from West Bromwich Albion, so we don't exactly know if Guaita will be between the sticks for Crystal Palace, but he has been playing in the preseason. Now you guys know how I've hyped up the Crystal Palace defense. They really have performed well last season. Their points per 90 minutes is great, and that's why that defense is slightly underrated in my opinion. So you guys can get Guaita at 1.8%, definitely a massive differential there. That trend continues with the Silva at 1.3%. Now the Brentford midfielder has been the 4.5 mid of choice for some managers, and with a lot of Brentford's midfield actually departing, he is quite a nice attacking option. Now, I'm not 100% sure if De Silva's absolutely nailed in that starting 11, so make sure that you check out Brentford's preseason to get all the information. Now, 4.0 defender of choice is not going to be Neco Williams from Nottingham Forest, it's actually Patterson from Everton. So Patterson has been starting the preseason games for Everton. Now, while Everton haven't really had the best preseason, at 4.0 million, not too much risk there, and some Everton fans have actually been saying that Patterson might actually be first choice at that fullback position. So if you guys don't want the high ownership of Neco Williams, Patterson might be your man to go for, and at 4.0 million, not too much risk there at the end of the day. And then finally, in terms of the 4.5 forwards, we have had one or two options starting in preseason. I think the Crystal Palace 4.5, the Nottingham Forest 4.5. There have been some other high ownership players like a Greenwood from Leeds, but none of these options might actually start. Now we have Archer, who's my selected 4.5 forward of choice. He has been starting some preseason games, look quite lively. Stevie G has actually praised them. Now, do I think he'll start? No, but at 3.6% ownership, if he does, you might be able to get some points if he comes off the bench. But out of these options, I think Guaita obviously is going to be a great asset if he does start for Crystal Palace. De Silva could be one of those hidden gems. But then with Patterson and Archer, I might just keep them or avoid them. But at the end of the day, they probably won't come off your bench anyways. But enough about the bench and assets that won't start. Let's go on to some assets that might start or should start at their price points. And the first goalkeeper and the goalkeeper of choice for my differential team is going to be Ramsdale from Arsenal. Now, in terms of the goalkeepers, I think the highest owned goalkeeper is Mendy at about 25%, so even he could be classified as a differential, but I decided to go a little bit less and go around that 10% mark, and I've opted for Ramsdale. Now, Ramsdale I think is going slightly under the radar, a great save points returner, does get those bonus points and the odd clean sheet, and if Arsenal can replicate some of that defensive form from last season, I think that Ramsdale could be a great asset. We also have Leno, who is going to be the second choice that's potentially departing the club, and therefore Ramsdale will be absolutely nailed as long as he doesn't get injured. But as I said, most goalkeepers are actually quite lowly owned. I think Edison's around 60%, same as Alisson. So any of them should actually be quite differential. But now we're going to move on to our defensive department or outfield defensive department. And the first player is going to come in with a cool 10.2% ownership. You probably wouldn't have guessed it. It's going to be Andy Robertson. So if you guys ask me why Andy Robertson is so lowly owned, I cannot give you guys a reason. I do not understand the fact that most people are spending quite a lot of money on their defensive department and Andy Robertson isn't in their drafts. For me, he's my favorite of the triple up for Liverpool. I know it's between Diaz and Robertson at the moment, but I always have said I prefer Robertson to Diaz. I think that extra 1 million can go quite far and I just prefer him as an FPL asset. So buy now while he's lowly owned so that you guys can claim that when he absolutely bangs in game week 1 and 2 that you owned him from the start, as 10.2% is just too low for me. Another asset with a high ceiling and a low ownership is going to be Ben Chilwell from Chelsea. Now this is quite understandable, had a long-term injury last season, hasn't played the majority of minutes in pre-season, and looks like Tuchel will manage his minutes back in the Prem. But let's just say that Chilwell is fit for game week 1, 8.7% is absolutely massive, and if you guys can bank on him to outscore James, this could be one of those players that helps you rise in the ranks. But as I said, in pre-season, hasn't looked as strong, has looked a little bit rusty, hasn't played every single minute, so I'd wait for those final Chelsea pre-season games just to get the best information as possible. We're then going to move on to another player that's been badly photoshopped into my team. I do apologize for that. It's going to be Zinchenko. He currently doesn't have an Arsenal picture, and that's why I had to use the Man City one, and then Odegaard in the foreground. But Zinchenko, newly signed for Arsenal, I think that he should be playing the majority of minutes, but I would like to see some certainty on that. Either some Arteta comments or maybe in preseason. If he finishes the preseason with a lot of minutes, then I will have faith in him, and he will be quite nice to have as he is only owned by less than 8% of managers. Now, out of the Arsenal defenders, I think that Tierney's probably the favorite at that price point. Gabriel also looks quite strong at 5.0, but Zinchenko, if he does play out of position, could be a nice little 5.0 million defender. Like Ramsdale, Arsenal have some great fixtures coming up, and that's why I do hope that they're quite defensively strong, because then Zinchenko will be absolute value for money. Another player that's quite dependent on preseason is going to be Kyle Walker. We obviously have the rumors of Cucurella potentially joining Man City. They are in the market for a new fullback, and that's why I do worry about Walker. But let's just say that Man City don't sign one, which I think is quite hard to believe. Then Walker could be an absolute steal at 5.0 million. So like his price point and his ownership correlate, 5% of managers do own Kyle Walker, and I think between him and Cancelo, they could offer you some points. But obviously Kyle Walker comes in cheaper, but isn't as nailed, especially if Man City do sign a new fullback. But for now, as I'm recording this video, they have not, so let's just put Kyle Walker in here and just hope that he manages to play. We're now going to move on to our midfield department where the ownerships do go up slightly. I think because there's so many midfielder positions and because the prices are quite good, these players might not be owned by less than 10%, but they are owned by less than 20%. The same can be said about Kevin De Bruyne, who will be my premium of choice, my differential premium of choice. He's owned by less managers than Son and also Salah. 16.6% is absolutely insane for me. I really do rate Kevin De Bruyne, but this just shows you how most managers do prefer Haaland, Kane, Son, or Salah. But I do think the Belgium is an absolute steal if he plays the majority of minutes. You guys saw in the video recently when I did optimize for points per game, Kevin De Bruyne was right in the sticks there in the midfield as our second favorite premium. I think in terms of Man City, the best option in terms of captaincy because you can rely on him starting every game, whereas with Haaland, he might be rotated or at least his minutes might be managed. We're now going to move on to our kind of pivot in our midfield department, and the first player is going to be Saka, and the reason I've included Saka in here is because if you look at Jesus, the ownership is above about 60%, whereas Saka comes in with only 16.7. Now after a record-breaking season for himself, I do really favour him, and if he can replicate the form of last season, we're in for an absolute treat at 8.0 million. But I do kind of understand the Jesus move because I personally own Gabriel instead of Saka. It just makes your draft a little bit more flexible, and I personally do favour Jesus to get more attacking returns than Saka will. But Saka will definitely be nailed in that right wing position, whatever kind of formation Arteta decides to play, and that's why I do favour him from a differential point of view if you guys don't want to go for Jesus. But now a third midfielder to go for, and this is exactly why you guys can't make this draft, because it has 4 Arsenal options. Now if you guys did have Zinchenko before the move when he still was at Man City, you guys can do this draft, but Odegaard for me at 10.7%, a nice alternative to someone like a Martinelli. I do believe Odegaard is one of the most nailed midfielders in that Arsenal lineup, and that's why I think at 6.5 million, a great differential asset. So I do agree that Martinelli probably has the highest ceiling, but Odegaard will get the minutes, and if you are sort of a safer FPL manager, he's probably one I would look at. And the final midfielder to go over is a player that I've been raving about this preseason. He's got the points per 90 minutes, but will he actually feature? It's going to be none other than Riyad Mahrez from Man City at a cool 6.0% ownership. Now, if you guys do look on your screens, you can see that the Man City assets here, Kevin De Bruyne, Kyle Walker, Mahrez, they're lowly owned assets, and most managers don't tend to go for Man City options because of the rotation. And that's why for me, an Erling Haaland is an absolute scare, because if you don't own him at that high percentage, and he does play most games for Man City, he's going to score points at the end of the day. But in terms of any Man City midfielders, a Foden, a Mahrez, also Grealish, all are quite lowly owned, and therefore for me, they're the best differentials in the game at the current moment. Now I have selected Mahrez because of that low ownership and also that high points potential. Just signed a new contract for Man City, so hopefully he should be featuring at right wing, but I do have some speculations about that front three that Pep might pick. But if you guys do have confidence that Mahrez will start the opening games, I would bring him in because the ceiling's absolutely sky high as long as he does play. Then finally, going on to my forward department, my first forward of choice is going to be none other than Jamie Vardy. Vardy's having a party at under 5% ownership, and with some nice games coming up for Leicester, and Vardy being back to full fitness, I do think he should play the majority of minutes. Now when Jamie Vardy plays, he does score. His XG might not be great, but his FPL points are sensational, and that's why at under 5% could be a nice little differential or kind of a half premium to go for. Weirdly enough, our second forward of choice is going to be Kai Havertz at the exact same ownership to Vardy, 4.7%. Now in terms of the Chelsea forward, if there's going to be no kind of business in that forward department for Chelsea this season, it's going to be either Timo Werner or Havertz, and we definitely know that Tuchel prefers Havertz at that striker position. Now I don't exactly think that Kai Havertz has it nailed down in that forward position, but if he does, can get off to the season with quite a hot start, I do think at 8.0 million he could be an absolute steal with those nice Chelsea fixtures coming up. But this is going to be the differential draft that I managed to come up with. It's not possible because of the 4 Arsenal assets, but you do have 2.5 in the bank if you may want to upgrade an Odegaard or a Saka to another asset. As I mentioned in the introduction, let me know who was your favorite differential before this video, and now after this video, whose kind of ownership has surprised you, and you might actually bring them into your FPL draft. I know for me that Mahrez's ownership is absolutely tempting. 6% of managers own him with that massive high ceiling. I think I might actually land up with Algerian in my Game Week 1 team. Otherwise, please remember that this is going to be as of recording. The ownerships might change, the talking points might change if, say, Cucurella signs for Man City, but other than that, everything should be on point. But this is basically a wrap of the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. As I always say, there's going to be tons of content leading up to that Game Week 1 deadline this coming Friday, so please turn that bell notification on so you don't miss any of my videos. But I'm signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.